We are very fortunate to have with us today poet Julie Danho. And Julie's first full-length collection, Those Who Keep Arriving, won the 2018 Gerald Cable Book Award from Silverfish Review Press. And her chapbook, Six Portraits, received the 2013 Slapering Whole Press Chapbook Award. And her poems have appeared in journals such as Pleiades, Alaska Quarterly Review, Blackbird, New Ohio Review, and they have also been featured several times on the Writer's Almanac, Poetry Daily, and Verse Daily. Julia has an MFA from Ohio State University and works as an editor in Providence, Rhode Island, where she is joining us from today. Julie, welcome. I will turn the program over to you, John, and you, Julie.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Julie, thanks. Thank you for reading today. And we start each week with the time to get to know the poet and their creative process. So I don't know, between 2020 and 2021, I feel like there's a theme machine that keeps grinding out, the pandemic, racial injustice, income inequality, the whole political cycle, January 6th, now the Chauvin trial verdict. It just seems like the themes are very dramatic. And I wanted to know if any of those themes are working their way into your current poetry.
They definitely have been. I would say I'm a pretty slow poet, and so I tend to revise things sometimes for years, but I have been writing, I would say probably most about the pandemic. I'm actually, for my job, I'm an editor at a health insurance company. And so I've been writing about COVID since February of 2020, and pretty much every day for my job. And so in addition to kind of the general information in the media, I feel like I've been particularly kind of steeped in or invested in all of that. And what I've really found is that in addition to sort of being part of my writing, it's also sort of changed the way that I write. I think being a person that I really love sort of being out in the world and writing. And so like I used to spend a lot of time in coffee shops and writing there, writing in art museums. And so I think sort of being at home all the time, I find that I'm sort of generating less new work than I used to, and I'm more revising existing work that I had. But I did find, I also find that some of my poems have kind of a different resonance for me in light of everything that's been happening. So on January 7th, I was scheduled to give a poetry reading, that had been, planned a couple months in advance before the Capitol riots. And I was thinking like, what on earth could I have to say, or, would be appropriate to say kind of at this point. And I actually had, I was going through my poems, and I had a poem that I had written when we took my daughter to visit DC a few years back, and I'd written all about the security bollards that they have in front of all of the buildings, the kind of like steel poles that prevent people from driving into the buildings, and how those were actually some of her favorite things in the city. She loved like just walking and swinging down by those. And I think rereading that poem kind of in light of everything that happened, really just kind of, it felt like the most appropriate thing that I had, and to sort of think about things like just in this new light. And even when I was getting ready for the reading today, I have a poem I wrote about Lebanon probably 15 years ago. And it was about my best friend. I'm Lebanese, and my best friend married a man from Lebanon and lives there. And it was written at the time of the Iraq War when she first moved there, and there was so much turmoil in the country and bombings and assassinations. And rereading it, it feels like that could have been written last year. So it's just kind of interesting, sort of how everything feels so immediate and different, and at the same time I can kind of see things in my work that feel current, even though they're totally not. Oh, I think you're on
No,
mute.
it's all good. No, I share an office with my wife, so we're
I
conflicting.
understand.
And then there she goes. There we go. Little exit stage left. So Julie, how did, I heard writing in coffee shops, writing in museums is what really starts the creative process for you? How does a poem kind of, get birthed? How does it begin for you?
I find a lot of times that I start writing about something and it takes a completely different direction. Like I start writing about one sort of literal subject. Like for example, one of the poems I was going to read today is called "The Best Chocolate Chip Cookie in New York City," and I am a huge dessert person, and one of my favorite things to do when I go to a city is to try and eat the best dessert possible there. And so my sister had told me about this bakery, and so I went there, and they didn't have the chocolate chip cookie that they were famous for, and so I literally started writing this poem about my disappointment in not being able to eat this cookie, and it ended up being a love poem for my husband. And so I find often that things just sort of take these kind of unexpected turns. I write a lot about art, and so I've often started, just sort of jotting down notes when I'm in a museum about things that interest me about the work, and then I'll kind of go home and research the artist and the work and learn more about it. And sometimes it turns into a poem about that piece of art, and sometimes it may just make its way in as a metaphor. I had seen a few years ago, I live near the Rhode Island School of Art and Design Museum, which is this wonderful small museum. And they had a exhibit about repair, and they had these beautiful old plates that were filled in with gold that were broken and then repaired with like gold. And so that that small detail ended up making it into a poem about my husband's concussion, at the end of the poem. And so one of my very favorite things is research. And so I often just find that true things end up in my poems, even if they're not always narrative, like 100% autobiographical or true, that I'm really interested in just sort of learning the facts about things. Like another one of the poems I'm going to read is about pink bathrooms. And I had a pink bathroom in my house and hated it. And then I noticed that as my daughter started making friends when she got older with other kids in the neighborhood, that there was pink bathrooms all over our neighborhood. And started thinking about like, well, why is this? And it turned out it was Mamie Eisenhower had a pink bathroom in the White House, and that she actually used to, when Dwight Eisenhower was in the military, she used to walk around with a paint stick that had like 3 colors on it: lime green and pink and cream. And every house that they had, she'd recreate it in those colors. And that's how they became kind of the colors of the 50s. And so there's always kind of like little details like that. Like that detail didn't actually make it into the poem, but those kinds of, I love like just sort of learning things and then incorporating them into my work.
Great. No, fantastic. Really, really nice. So we know from, 48 plus weeks that, a poem is never finished. It's always percolating and just about to come out of the oven. but when you're ready to put together a publication, how do you know when a poem is done for you and ready to be published?
Well, I'm particularly lucky, I think, because my husband is also a poet. And so I have a live-in editor collaborator. So I find that that gives me a lot of freedom sometimes to try things and to say like, well, sometimes I'll write several endings, and then we'll talk about them and kind of think about which one is working, or, do they all need to be kind of, put together in some way, or so I think that working with someone else, my husband, so has been really wonderful for my process. And especially I'm a particularly, like I mentioned, slow writer, and so I work on things for so long that when I finally finish them, I'm not one of those poets that goes back into something that I consider to be done. I think because it took me such a long and agonizing process to get there sometimes, that I'm not usually willing to go back in. But I also I really love the revision process even more sometimes than like writing initial drafts.
Great. Well, thank you for your insights, and now we want to hear you read some of your poems.
Thank you. So most of the poems I'm going to read are from my first book, my first full-length book. And I also want to, so Margot Tefstever is here tonight, and she is one of the editors at Sophomore Hall Press, and they published my first chapbook back in 2014, which was one of the highlights of my life. So this first poem is one of the poems that I was just mentioning. It's called "The Best Chocolate Chip Cookie in New York City." In case there's a line, I show up at 7, but the man at the counter says the cookies won't be ready until 11, and by then I'll be on the train, nearly halfway back to Providence. He and the dozen people behind me are waiting, so I quickly choose a ham croissant and a blueberry muffin, glittering like a hotel lobby chandelier. The shop's a dab of yellow on the block. It's only seats along the front window where I sit and look at bleary people stopped at the bodega across the street, touching apples and mangoes until they find the ones most untouched. With my first bite, the croissant comes undone, its shawl falling to the floor. I break off the peak of the muffin and hear the sugar overfill the valleys of my back teeth. I'm trying not to think about how it must taste, the best chocolate chip cookie in New York City. How big, how warm, how it would have collapsed in my mouth, traveled my blood, made wild pinwheels of my cells. How much time have I lost hunting perfection? Once, before cell phones, before the days when cars couldn't linger outside the airport doors, my plane was delayed on the runway for 4 hours, and my husband, before he was my husband, waited for me in his cramped Plymouth, battered from years of lake effect snow. He just waited, reading a book, turning on the car every so often to listen to the radio. When I finally arrived, he was surprised that I thought he'd be gone. He said no one asked why he was there so long or what it was he was waiting for. This next poem is actually the last poem in the book. And so my husband and I were invited maybe like five or 6 years ago to give a Valentine's Day reading together, because he had been giving a reading for the Rhode Island Council on the Arts, and then they found out that I was a poet too. And so those art centers said, like, well, why don't you guys come and do a Valentine's Day one, which was, wonderful. My husband had some really great love poems about me, and I didn't have any about him. And I didn't have any love poems, and every one I had written before was wildly unsuccessful. And so I don't remember what I read, but so I wrote this poem about a climate, after hearing an interview on NPR about a climate scientist who was talking about the apocalypse and how the apocalypse wasn't going to be exactly like we thought it was going to be. And when I showed it to my husband, he was like, this is a love poem. So this is an apocalyptic love poem. It's called I Want to Eat Bugs with You Underground. The scientist on the radio said that humans will survive. And at first I was buoyed, but she only meant some of us, the ones living in tunnels, eating crickets to survive, when the rest had died from mass starvation after droughts lasted longer and seas rose faster and wars killed bigger because everyone wanted what little was left. I'd be fine with being one of the billions dead unless you were still alive. Under a down comforter or by a trash fire, I want to be where you are. You know how poorly I dig holes, how angry I get when I'm cold, how twice I've accidentally maced myself, and still you take me with you down into the earth, give me more than my fair share of caterpillar. Few believe we're in the middle of the end because ruin can happen as slowly as plaque blocking arteries, and only later feels as true as your hand resting on my hip, both of us quiet as roses, waiting for the bees to arrive. And this next poem is the pink bathroom one that I was just talking about. So this poem is called Ode to My Pink Bathroom. How long I've tried to love you, the way you still blush and gleam like a teenager in a poodle skirt, unblemished as the day you were pressed against wire and mortar in the shower, on the walls, even the floor, its concrete flecked with pink. The Nolans who chose you are long gone, their daughters now grandmothers in their own houses, the blueprints they left behind moldering in the basement. How can I blame them? I didn't live through the war, the boom, this neighborhood rising up in neat rows as if each cape had been pining for sun. In those years, you were prosperity, pedigree, First Lady Pink, named in honor of Mamie Eisenhower, her White House bathroom pink from the walls to the tub to the cotton balls, so that all over America, millions like me wake up and stumble into a past that waits with toothbrush and soap. In you, I saw history running like a faucet, building to a flood unless stemmed. But when the contractor gave me a price, he said you were lead, and with my daughter, it might be better to let you be. So I'll own your purr and poison, though I may still dream of reinvention, blue trim and harbor gray, even as I hang the pink polka dot shower curtain, lay down that cranberry rug, act as if I chose you, as if you were everything I ever wanted. So the follow-up to that poem is that that poem was accepted by New Ohio Review, which was one of my favorite literary magazines. And then 2 weeks later, we had a leak in that bathroom. And because it was built, the piping was built next to a chimney, they had to destroy the tile to open up the wall. And in Rhode Island, they have a law that says if you can't match your tile, then they have to retile your whole bathroom. So I now have a blue and gray bathroom, just like in the poem. And my daughter had to move out for a week because of the lead remediation. So it was a sort of a very strange follow-up to getting that poem published. This next poem is called The Concussion. And a few years ago, my husband just tripped and fell in the house and got this terrible concussion. And for my job, I had actually written a lot about concussions, but more about like kids and sports injuries and preventing them and things. And I had never seen one up close. So this is called The Concussion. All the doctor could prescribe was darkness and quiet, blinds closed, screens off, no reading, no driving. I held his arm as he went down the stairs, walked behind while he climbed. The snow kept falling, feet on feet. Water seeped into the basement for weeks. To be near him, our daughter multiplied by booklight. Reading, I learned our brains are softer than the meat I buy at the market, can be damaged with just the touch of a thumb. He never forgot his name, but could barely sign the medical forms, the black letters blurring together, floating like the brain floats in cerebrospinal fluid, like the embryo floats in its thin amniotic sac. How do we rely on these bodies that are holding tanks for water and blood? Weeks in, I leaned out our bedroom window, chopped snow with a broom until our roof looked like a smashed sheet cake, its pieces beginning their slow, delicious slide over the gutter. Had this been any other winter, he would have waited with the shovel below. But still, he couldn't tolerate daylight, and even I had to shield my eyes from the sun's reflection, wild and thick with thorns. The doctor had said a month. It came and went. Then another. He read for 10 minutes, then 20. He started to pull up the blinds in the morning. How did I feel the day he walked our daughter the 2 blocks to the bus? Like we'd been fractured and our seams filled in with gold. And this next poem is actually, so when I got this book taken by Silverfish Review Press, they were super wonderful, and they asked me what I wanted for, the editor asked me what I wanted for the cover, and I really wanted to have an artwork that I wrote about in the book on the cover. And a few years ago, I had gone to Barcelona on a fellowship, and all of the guidebooks kept saying, like, you have to go to this hospital, this old hospital, and see it. And you know, I was like, I wasn't very interested in an old hospital, but I'm kind of a by the book kind of traveler. And I was like, all right, they said this is so great, I'm gonna go see it. And so, and it was amazing. It was like this old hospital that had this like gorgeous architecture, and they had restored the whole thing, and it was all these UN buildings and nonprofit buildings, and in one of them was a gallery, and there was an exhibition called Inner Light, an art and therapy experience at the end of life. And as part of it, they had all of these light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, and they had feathers and other natural objects in them. And so you can kind of see a little bit of the cover. So that's what's on the cover. I contacted the artist out of the blue, and his name's Carlos Pierre Claremont, to ask him if I could use it on the cover. And he was incredibly gracious and said, oh, you know, sure, no problem. And so it makes me happy every time I see it. So this poem is called Process Inspiration for the Final Piece. And that's also the name of the light bulb installation. More than 50 light bulbs without light hang from the gallery ceiling, not from wire, but varying lengths of string, knocking lightly against our faces, arms, even knees, no matter how carefully we slip between. Inside each, in place of the filament, a feather. The blue-eyed peacock fills its space like a gas. Others take up less, the glossy crow shadowing a curve, the narrow brown and yellow, finch, sparrow, straight down the middle, like a jumper with arms at her sides. 100 years ago, this very room was part of Barcelona's hospital, where people came to be saved or tried to be saved. And now we stand here amidst bulbs with no glow, no heat, useless except for their glory, the way they bell off our bodies, their feathers like tongues, either silent or ringing at a register that's too high to hear. This next poem is the one I mentioned about Lebanon. And so my best friend from when I was a child is is not Lebanese, but she kind of grew up in my house practically with me. And so she knew all the foods and a few words in Arabic and things like that. And so when she ended up marrying a man from Lebanon and moving there. And so I wrote this poem because I felt really terrible at the fact that I wasn't going to her wedding in Lebanon. It was a pretty tumultuous time there, and I didn't feel comfortable going, but I also felt really, really awful about not going. And so in this, it might be helpful to know Sita means grandmother in Arabic. Debki is kind of a traditional Arabic dance. And then I think that's it. So this is called Old Country. The bomb went off in your day, my night. I wake to death, not yours, for the newsman doesn't say American, doesn't say woman, and the words not said are those that let morning begin. Beirut was just a myth until you left, a land my sit-off fled, then closed her mouth around. It's different from the rest, you said, as if a country small as Connecticut could ignore its neighbors knocking, as if tribal feuds were not interred in shallow graves, and I had not conspired with the Maronites, the Shiites, the PLO, on reasons why you were wrong to go. When you threw the ocean over your shoulder, you vowed to stay a year or two, just until his visa came through and he could wander midtown without his crucifix on show. Now, every Saturday, his relatives sweep you into weddings at beach resorts, nights you fold into airplanes to chiffon across my lawn. But how can I revel in these brides who arrive on thrones, or their hired flame eaters, or their 8-foot sword-cut cakes, or the 700 shots of Eric in their honor, when with every debki, you retreat further into the dark's full skirt? They've taught you to smooth into a leg, a kick, a forward stomp, those same steps my mother steps until her wedding film unspools. My friend, time runs backward to avoid its end. It's nearly Valentine's again, 1 year since the death of Hariri, when the streets bared their teeth, fossilized in the rubble. The protests you pretended not to attend are over, and the revolution's ire has grown as rare as the cedar. But don't tell me bombs are just for the marked, for these days only begin that way. Months from today, you'll ride side saddle to the cathedral, your diamonds blazing above Romans fallen on Phoenicians, above Arabs soldered to Ottomans, their hoary cities all hot for resurrection, one good detonation. Among these bones lie maids of old Rome, who gave their lives as decoys for their brides. How startled they'd be to find you in strata of lace and silk. No one to walk first, no one to hold down the road that tries to rise as you pass. And that poem too has kind of a, so she ended up not getting married in Lebanon because she had to be evacuated during one of the wars there. So she actually got married in Providence. So I was in her wedding, even though it was, wish it hadn't worked out that way for her. So this next poem is called Distance, and this is the this is a poem I wrote about an incident that happened on the one of the buses in Providence. I work in downtown Providence, and I've been taking the bus to work for decades now. And I, in general, well, pre-pandemic, loved being on the bus. But this is a poem, I think, that's very much about, I was telling John before this, I was like, I think this is the darkest poem I've ever written. but it's very much about kind of assessing risk and danger. And even though it's not at all about the pandemic, is one of the ones that feels a little bit more resonant now, I think, to me anyway. This is called Distance. You can fawn over cancer in a smoker if you've never taken a drag. You can feel sorrier when the woman was mugged late at night. And when a child drowns, you know you would have latched that fence, listened for footsteps by the door. It's said that tragedy draws us closer, yet we look for a rock to wedge between us and horror. Today, on the bus route I take to work, a man stabbed a woman until she died. It was early afternoon. I heard it first on the news and later at our stop, how quickly talk leapt from shock to sympathy to, did she know him? Randomness is the mad king of fear. No one can prepare for the man who pulls a knife before she even looks up. The reporter had said once it was over, 3 men held him until the cops came. Tonight, we waited in wool and fleece, in down and leather, in a tight circle of streetlight. Did any of us wake tonight and think we'd be dead by day's end? Maybe she did. After all, it was her husband, which made us feel better. It's always safer when someone is killed by someone they loved.
All I gotta say is, woo.
Oh, I know that. I actually don't read that one that often because it's so
It's
so
intense.
dark.
Yeah, it's intense. No, it's great. Very, very great.
Thank you. So I wanted to read a couple of new poems. These poems were published in Sugar House Review, which is also one of my favorite journals. And the first one I wanted to read is the one about the security bollards that I mentioned. So this is called Ode to the Security Bollards of Constitution Avenue. And it has an epigraph from Metro Connection News magazine in DC, which says, each bollard is a highly engineered piece of steel meant to withstand an 8-ton truck barreling at it at 50 miles an hour. My daughter runs up like you are her soldiers returning from war, flinging her arms around your poles, swinging down your single file, head thrown back to the sky, inciting others to drop their parents' hands and follow her lead. We drove 400 miles so she could tour the halls of the Capitol, climb the steps of Lincoln's Temple. Yet it's you she loves best. All along the mall, she finds your variations in silver, in copper, even preening in green Greek columns with the congressional seal, and never questions why it is you're here. When I lived in the city, I'd visit Rockets and Pollocks without emptying the metal in my pockets, but that was years before she was even an idea, before they planted you in neat rows around everything worth ruining. Now my child treats you like her playground, and I keep quiet about what you're waiting for, how deep you're driven into the ground. And this next poem is, I have 2 poems about cookies, which probably tells you something about their importance to me in general. But this is called Baking Cookies During the Pandemic. First, molasses, the sticky jar dug from the back of the cupboard, its sweet tar pausing, then falling on sugar. Ellie's careful not to overfill the cup since there's no more flour at the store. And when she drags the knife across, the extra is dust, not her usual avalanche. She's not tall or strong enough to thoroughly mix, so I take over spoon and spatula until the batter looks like wet sand on the beaches where people still gather. We roll them small so it feels like more, and so we can freeze some for the weeks ahead. Out of the oven, I taste something amiss, add salt right from the shaker. and the grains come down almost as invisibly as what keeps us home. Today on the radio, the governor said they didn't have everything to make the tests, compared it to baking without butter or eggs. Are we allowed to be this happy? We eat so many, our bodies are heavy to carry. So my daughter is going into middle school next year, but this is a poem that I wrote before she started kindergarten, and it involves a telescope, and you can't see it, but there's a giant telescope right next to me that is the telescope in the poem, because it's so big we keep it in our dining room. so this is called The Night Before Kindergarten. This year, late summer is the time to see Saturn. So my husband drags the 5-foot telescope to the backyard, fiddles with lenses and charts as our daughter does somersaults in the dark, gleeful to be up past 8. I shiver in a t-shirt and shorts as she lowers her face to the eyepiece, taking in this planet orbited by dust and rocks of ice, some large as a school bus, while my husband explains the rings could be from a dead moon or what was left over when Saturn was born. She is impressed, but not as impressed as us the first time we saw it, when she was weeks old and we were grateful to be outside where we couldn't hear her wail, our world grown airless as a closed jewelry box. To her, the extraordinary is still ordinary. So why not planet shuttle to the eye by a tube tall as a sister? We've shut every light in the house to keep the night clean, to let her see the show that's all for her, the girl we made and circled until she knew she was the sun. Tomorrow we'll send her off to unlearn it, to discover, as we did, how small we are, how little we matter anywhere but here. And the last poem I wanted to read is about a trip that we took to New York. And so we had gone back in the days when you could see a Broadway show. We went to see a show, and we were coming back on the subway around 11 o'clock at night to my friend's apartment. And my husband and daughter got off the subway and the doors closed before I could get off. And it was definitely some sort of mistake, because there was a whole crowd of people who were behind me. And so this is what happened next. So this is called The Subway Doors Closed. The subway doors closed after my husband and daughter, but before me, and she began screaming on the platform as the train lurched the length of a few cars, then stopped hard, the crowd surging forward, reaching over and in front of me, trying to force open the doors, when shouting came from the back. Someone's fallen on the tracks, a child. I was confused. My girl had been the only child on the platform. Panic came on slow as air bubbles in the water before it boils, but it must have been just milliseconds before I turned and said, "A child?" And a woman yelled, "That's her mother. Get her mother off this train. This woman needs off the train." All went still as they stared at me, and it felt like the time I flipped over my car, hitting every side, then wasn't sure if I was dead or alive, because I'd been looking at my child a minute before, and they're saying she's on the tracks with the rats and the electricity and the trains charging this way. Had she run toward the car when it started to move and slid over the edge? She'd had on Mary Jane's and a polka dot dress. I pressed myself against the glass, frantic as a pinned moth, its wings still beating. I tried to see down to where she'd been as the crowd murmured like a receiving line, a few people laying their hands on my back, as suddenly they appeared. My husband waving, my daughter still screaming. It was a grown woman who fell, not in, but next to the tracks. She was drunk, trying to get the doors open for the rest of us, so my husband had no idea why everyone on the train was looking at the two of them, why people started hugging and congratulating me as if she'd just been born. Thank you.
Well, Julie, now it's no bus rides with you, no train rides, no
I
subway
know,
rides,
I
no
know.
airplane rides. You're a transportation jinx. There's something with you in transportation. You take the number 4 subway. I'll take the number 6. We don't want to be on the same. No, it's great. I wanted to tell you too, the cookie baking's my hobby.
Oh, that's awesome.
We should have a poetry cookie hour, Wendy. Well, we have
should.
ideas for. No, thank you for. Just so many visuals came up. That subway story, the bus. Oh, tremendous for me.
Thank you.
I second that, Julie. Your reading was amazing. I've read a bunch of your work, but you read some things I had not heard yet, and I'm just impressed and grateful. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was so lovely to be here.
We're delighted that you have been. I'd like to open the floor to questions and comments from the audience. I do see in the chat box a question for you. Which poets do you take inspiration from?
So I would say one of my very favorite poets is Tony Hoagland. He really has, I love what he does with humor, and his poems are funny and devastating, and so I really admire that. I also really love Dorian Lau. I love Katie Ford, Martha Collins. I feel like when I started writing, I really wanted to be Martha Collins, and I think that I tried to kind of write like her for a while, and then realized that like I just could not get anywhere near like anything that she was doing. But I really love her work so much. My very favorite thing is metaphor, and so I think all of those poets just are really just amazing at metaphor.
Yeah, I think for me, I'll just tell you that I loved in some of the poems how kind of ordinary life experiences became this impactful drama in the last 2 lines. No, it was like no, I don't know. I just find the ordinary that turns into the extraordinary to be very amazing. So that's just me.
Thank you. Yeah, I really, it's funny when I was trying to figure out what to call my book, for a while I had a draft that I called Gallery, because there are so many poems about art, and I tried to kind of organize it around some of the art poems and then put them with poems that I felt like made sense with them. And I ended up calling it Those Who Keep Arriving, because I felt like, well, it is a line from one of the poems in the book, but also I felt like there were so many themes that kept coming back in the book, themes and people, that it really felt like there's these kind of things that like I didn't necessarily want to, but couldn't get away from in my work. And there's so much about my family and art and just and place too. I think that that keep coming up in a lot of the poems in the book.
Very nice.
Thank you. I have to admit, I was hoping that you would read the Jenny Perowski poem.
I have. Do you want me to read? I have never read the Jenny Perowski poem.
Oh, what a great opportunity!
we have 13 minutes left.
Okay, so this poem. Oh, I have a story about this Jenny Perowski poem. So I was a very overweight child, like very overweight, and kids are not very nice to kids that are very overweight. And so I wrote this poem about So when I got this poem published, I was asked if Jenny Perowski was the real name of my childhood bully, and she is not. She is a composite character of several bullies, and I gave her a new name. But the I actually had, like, shortly after my book was published, I had an encounter with the real Jenny Perowski, who is now works with me. So,
Uh-oh.
but I mean, we just pretended we didn't know each other. But anyway, so this is called Jenny Perowski is ahead of me in the grocery store line. If an Amish family can forgive the man who burned their land, surely I can say hello to Jenny Perowski, who used to call me Fatty Fat in 7th grade math and had boys call my house pretending to ask me out. That was 20 years ago. Now Jenny, if not fat exactly, is puffy as a slightly overstuffed chair. I'm thinner than her, and my pleasure feels more whiskey than cream. Makes me want to pour out her Coors bag to rifle for candy, then slowly eat it in front of her like she once did to me. I know her cruelty was, at best, a misdemeanor, but anger is like a peppermint in a pocketbook. Everything inside takes on its smell and taste. I could break it in my teeth, make it disappear. Instead, I savor the mint, let the sugar line my mouth like fur, linger far past what could be called pleasure. How good it would be to be better than this.
Okay, not going to the grocery store either. I'm not going to Providence. I was. No, kidding. No, really great.
I was wondering what you're working on now, Julie.
I'm actually, so I'm trying to, well, I mean, I'm not anywhere close to working on a second manuscript in terms of putting anything together, but I've been working on a couple poems about Providence. And I was also, I find that I've just been really going back and trying to finish up some older stuff. I also find that I think being trapped in the house has made me write about things in my backyard in a way that I never anticipated. So nothing really like thematic, but it has been really, one of the really nice things is like I write in the morning, and now that I don't have a commute anymore, I do have more time to write in the morning before work. So that's really been, that's been really wonderful.
Did you get vaccinated yet?
I did. I got my first shot last Tuesday.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I was very, very excited.
Oh, good. That's great. Good. Well, beautiful reading. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Mary. Thanks for coming.
It was just really wonderful, Julie. We're so grateful that you joined us today. Thank you, and thank you to our audience for joining us. And as always, John, thank you for arranging this series.
All charged up for the week now.
Exactly. So we'll be back next week, Wednesday at 1:00. Please join us and visit our YouTube channel to watch other poets in action.
Great.
So thank you all, and have
Thanks again,
a
Julie.
lovely afternoon.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.